Hello, my name is Synymata, and this is a breakdown of my song Die Young and Drifting. So Die Young started out as a demo that I had that I sent to Elle a while back. She basically took what I had and then she recorded this idea of a chorus, which is basically what we have in the final, plus some ideas for verses and stuff. But for me, that was enough to really kind of understand what this whole track could be. And when I got those vocal stems in, I ended up expanding on what I had originally, and that ultimately turned into what is Die Young. And after that, I remember flying out to Vegas, and then we wrote out basically both verses and then did all the final vocal takes together over a weekend. That was really great to do in person because it's something that I always tell producers. It's really good to get involved with vocal sessions because there's so many little things that you can capture in a session versus just telling someone, hey, just cut the finals on this track. And that's absolutely the case in this song because doing that session in person, all the little things that you might hear, you can capture all that in the moment versus over an email chain or text or whatever. All right, let's just get into it. So Die Young also has a lot of chord variations similar to Leave Me Waiting. And again, in this case, it really helps to just having the writing do a lot of work for you off the bat instead of having to kind of, embellish things with production and effects and stuff like that. And again, just kind of like how I mentioned in my Leave Me Waiting breakdown, when the writing can do a lot for you, it's just really great because then again, all the production just kind of falls into place because again, so much variations are just baked into the chords. And that to me is again, where I love to be with tracks because then you don't have to do a lot of work in terms of embellishing like a very simple progression. So let's just take a listen to this intro and just take a look at these chords for the verse and the pre-chorus.
Nothing scares me more than getting older. I don't think that I can do it sober. Every impending goodbye, and how quickly time flies, there's nowhere to hide. I don't wanna grow up. The thought of it is too much. My heart's been broken enough. I wanna.
And I'll stop it right there for now. So a couple things to mention here. So the writing in this beginning is basically just like a 6, 7, 8 progression resolving to the C minor. But what's kind of nice, and actually I remember doing this in Lonely Nights, when the bass comes in, the bass note does not go to C, it goes to F.
Nothing scares me more than getting older.
Right there. And that's something that I've done in some other tracks like Lonely Nights where it just feels nice to have that borrowed bass note, and that technically would create like a 7th chord with like a note removed essentially. But again, it's just kind of the writing just adding variation to the track even when the chords are somewhat repetitive in the intro. But again, I love doing that kind of thing because again, the song kind of just is carrying itself forward foundationally instead of you having to embellish it with random sounds and whatnot. All right, let's take a look at the chords and the build and then the drop now.
I wanna die young. I wanna die young. I don't wanna hurt you, but none of this is fun. I hope I go first, 'cause everything hurts. With every farewell, what is hello? I wanna die young. I wanna die young. I think we all know I don't belong on earth.
And I'll stop it there for now. One thing to point out that's interesting is, the progression of the intro and then going into the chorus, it's the same chord. I know some people might think that that's kind of strange because then you're just playing the same chord again. But I have found in a lot of cases, it can work just fine. Sometimes just kind of starting the next section, kind of where you ended the last section, can feel really nice. And in this case, there's a lot of stuff that's coming in at this point that kind of allows that to kind of work in a way. It really depends on just how the song feels at that point to be repeating chords like this. But when it works, I love doing it. And one thing to mention too is, so this progression here is kind of unique to the chorus itself. And then at the very end of the progression, it changes over to this F, G sharp, A sharp kind of a bass line. And that is intentional because that sets up the writing of the drop, which is doing the same thing. Basically just sitting on F, G sharp, A sharp, and then going onto a C at the end. But I love doing this in tracks where, you know, to like kind of foreshadow like what you're going to hear in a drop, or like if you're going to introduce a different writing, having it exist somewhere before in the track just feels really nice. But the one difference though with the progression in the build versus the drop is that F baseline is held longer. It's held over 8 bars, and then it starts to step up like that progression in the build, but then it also goes to this C chord at the end. But yeah, so that's basically the writing of the track. It's, you know, again, verse chords, some variations throughout the pre-chorus, and then the build sets up the progression that you hear in the drop, and then that is just repeated again in the second half, and then in the second drop as well. All right, so let's get into the drop now. You know, the drop is basically sitting on that F chord, but the one nice thing is that there's a lot of movement with that because it's very choppy to keep it pretty interesting. So let me just turn the vocals back on really quick and let's take a listen to this. So just breaking down like the bass layers, nice sub with a fat overtone on it, kind of my standard. Yeah. Yeah, just a lot of layers on this. I end up doing this kind of a interesting processing on this. So as you can see that there's this empty channel, but there's an in on this, and this is coming from the buzzy channel here. And what's happening is I'm running this through just Valhalla, and then I'm high passing this and reduxing it, and then this is getting smashed into that maximizer, and then again more EQing on this. And it's kind of a strange way to do it, but essentially the reverb that you're hearing and a lot of this is coming from this other channel. But yeah, to me, like that just adds a lot of nice high end, and this could have been done on that same channel, but again, this is just the bass that I arrived at. And then yeah, there's another layer here. And then one thing to mention too is with this drop, for the bass especially, I'm doing a lot of this automation here where I just constantly am turning on the bass and turning it off because I wanted this to have a nice like bang, so it like hits and then it like cuts out immediately. Then this one channel does stay open because that choppy utility on the gain, that's before the reverb here. And again, sometimes it's like, in this case, having a little bit of reverb like post the bass notes hitting, you know, made a lot of sense, but having that be only one element made the most sense just so that the whole drop wasn't so riddled with like reverb on the bass. And then just to mention, so after the bass line kind of moves on with the progression and it starts to go up to that G sharp, A sharp, C part of the progression, I have some power chords coming in here. And then at that point, the sub goes from being a straight sub to starting to pluck there. And that to me is just a nice way to just kind of have some variation in the drop. So, you know, for the initial part of it, you know, you have this nice choppy motion, but then it starts to kind of have more of a rhythm going into like the second half of that progression, essentially. So that's basically the bass. At that last 8 bars in here, this all turns strummy. Then I also know there's some automation on here to kind of back off the bass because obviously it's really aggressive during the main part of this drop. And doing that is probably, yeah, just some EQing on this. you can see, some of this automation, the overtone on the sub is being turned down here, and then I have the octave switching on this fuzzy layer, just so that it's not so aggressive anymore. Because again, these kind of sections in songs, they can be kind of tricky to produce it because you still want it to feel like a drop, but with the vocal coming back in and, you know, the drop is kind of stepping down in energy, you have to find ways to make the elements that you already have just sound that they fit that section of a track. And doing that, again, a lot of times it's just automating things that make sense. So again, filter notches, or like in this case, I have this bass reverb really turning down here. And it's just, you just have to find the things to back off to make those sections just feel correct for the section that they're in. All right, so now going into the drop lead stuff. So yeah, so the chords of the drop are basically being played across certain synths here. So listening to all of it together. And that's one thing I'll mention too. This ending here, there's a lot of dissonance going on here. Yeah, but then on this one synth, this is playing a G and a G sharp, so there's a lot of like rubbing here. Again, anyone that's taken songwriting, dissonance can sound really nice in certain tracks just to add a lot of tension. I would argue in melodic bass, it's not something that's typical to have a lot of like dissonance like that. But for this song and just kind of the vibe of it, having that ending note of this progression just being really like jarring in a way just felt correct for the track, I would say. And then just to mention, there's some other effects going on here. This is definitely her vocal. Yep. That's just like young there. And that's just filling in those in-betweens of those gaps. And that's layered with some drop stuff as well on the vocal. Yeah, and that to me is really like, because again, like that first half of the drop, it's very choppy. There's that opportunity to kind of fill in those gaps with like other sounds. And that's exactly what's going on here. And again, for me, I love some atmosphere. I love filling in those gaps with things just to kind of add something to the drop and just to really elevate it. And just to mention like how to go about doing that, it really is just like an ear thing. You just kind of have to, as you're listening to your track and you feel these gaps kind of forming in what you're writing, finding things that can fit into those gaps can be kind of tricky, but honestly, it's just like a lot of other things. Whenever you hear like a really cool effect sound in a song, a lot of times that sound, the producer did not hear it in their head and then make it and then fit it into the track. They probably tried a lot of different things and then eventually found what worked. And then from there, they either built it up to make it sound more full, or it just sounded good as is, and they left it. So obviously in this song, you know, this has been boiled down to these 4 layers along with those vocal stabs. But at some point when I was working the song, there's probably like 30 or 40 channels of ideas that were turned off that I had tried. Again, that kind of thing is just like a grinding it out sort of thing to find things that fit in those gaps and sound really nice. And then getting to the drop percussion of this, a lot of snare layers here. Let's just solo these really quick. Yeah, very splashy. And then just giving like the foundational snare hit there. There's also a lot of snare effect stuff going on as well. You could probably hear at the end, there's like a double snare hit here. And these are just all samples. And again, that's just really just like a spotting thing and just kind of listening and kind of feeling out what should go there. Is that some effect thing? Is that a snare thing? Is that a melodic reverse thing? It's just the kind of thing that you just feel out as you're working on a track and kind of making those decisions as you kind of go through it. So yeah, I would say that's basically the drops in a nutshell. You know, a lot of bass layers, a lot of synth layers that are kind of creating chords. And from there, filling in those gaps because of how choppy it is with atmosphere is really what kind of creates the drop as a full sounding idea, I would say. So some of you might be wondering why this breakdown is both Die Young and Drifting. And the reason for that is because Drifting lives in the same project as Die Young. So when I stemmed this out and everything, it was part of that stem package. But later down the pipeline, that song got split off into its own master file, essentially. The only thing I'll mention about Drifting was this was created after I had committed to doing an album. And I knew that with an album, there's a lot of things that you can kind of get away with. And one of those is having like an interlude kind of a track. And that's exactly what Drifting is for me. So the chords of Drifting are independent of Die Young. However, the progression flows from Die Young into that, and that was obviously intentional because, you know, the album is, a lot of it is continuous mix, so there being some jarring switch in the writing wouldn't make any sense. The one thing about Drifting, though, is there's a lot of this seventh-y kind of action going on where the chords are kind of droning, but then the bass line is what's changing. And that's basically the writing of the entire interlude. I do remember this splice loop that I found. Yeah. Yeah, that really kind of builds out the top end of that pad that you hear. And then there's this other element here that was just frozen from something that I used a while ago, just to kind of have a nice initial like hit of this interlude track where you're just kind of like, ooh, this is interesting, this is different. And then there's some little flares in here, just some good old serum, just a sine wave. Kind of messy, you know, and then again, these notes are kind of just placed however sounded right. Again, trusting your ears, really, nothing's quantized in those. And then the vocals, this was again going back to like doing a session in person. At the time, I had written out basically a concept for Drifting before I flew to Vegas to work with Elle. And after we finished writing and cutting the vocals for Die Young, I just told her, hey, so there's this interlude track. Do you want to just ad lib some ideas on top of it? I'm thinking mostly like vocal effects stuff that I'm going to be doing for the song and just fuck around and see what sounds kind of cool. And that's exactly what we did. Was we just did a bunch of passes of vocals on here, and when I came back home to my studio, that's when I went through it and started to find cool riffs and things that just felt really cool for an interlude. And there's definitely a lot of reverse reverbs in here. Yeah, my favorite is definitely this here. Yeah, Portal, just like a really weird very wet vocals. But again, for this, the vibe was just to have this pause on the album. Again, just having a lot of weird vocal takes. And again, that's what Elle's really good at, is just ad-libbing and coming up with random things. And that's really how that song was built out. And then at the very end, I do introduce this melody. that just fades out to nothing. It was very fun to write like an interlude track like this because you can really only get away with it like on an album, but I wanted to do it and just have something that was just interesting and different from what I've been putting out for the last several years. So yeah, so I would say that's basically Die Young and Drifting. Thanks for watching this. Thanks for checking this out. Stay tuned for the other breakdowns from the tracks on my album, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.